He twisted her arm, mocked her address, and shoved her into the back of a cruiser, laughing like he'd just put another mouthy black woman in her place. But in 43 minutes, that same officer would be standing at attention, trembling as the Pentagon marched in and asked for her by rank, General. Before we continue this powerful story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another powerful story you won't want to miss. The sun was melting into the horizon, painting the sky above Westfield Heights in deep oranges and purples. Streetlights flickered on in rhythmic succession, casting long shadows across cracked sidewalks and rusted fences. General Victoria Taylor sat behind the wheel of her navy blue sedan, moving slowly through the neighborhood where she was born. The car was clean but not flashy. Her pressed blouse and slacks were elegant but unremarkable. No insignia, no rank, no clues. But everything about her was deliberate. Every breath, every glance, every movement had a quiet weight to it. She was not here by accident. She wasn't lost, and she wasn't running late. She had chosen this route, this hour, this exact timing, because it aligned with an operation 6 months in the making. In the back seat sat a carefully folded uniform bearing 4 stars and decades of silent war stories. But today, none of that mattered. Victoria passed a community mural painted on the side of a corner store. A black boy in a graduation cap throwing his arms to the sky with a diploma in one hand. Underneath it read, "See me, know me, protect me." She glanced at it for a second longer than necessary, because she understood what was coming, and what it would cost. The road stretched out ahead, narrowing as it approached the border between Westfield and Greenfield. That border had always been more than just a street sign. It was a threshold, dividing not just neighborhoods, but realities. 1 block past the line, black drivers faced delayed stops, aggressive searches, and unwarranted citations. It was unspoken, unofficial, and unmistakably intentional. Up ahead, blue and red lights blinked in mechanical rhythm. Flood lamps cast a harsh glow over a police checkpoint that sprawled across the road like a trap laid in plain sight. Officers loitered with clipboards and flashlights, their posture relaxed but alert. Their expressions were unreadable until they locked eyes with someone from the wrong side of the city. Victoria slowed her car as instructed, her window already rolling down. Her grip on the steering wheel remained loose, no fear, no hurry, just observation. Her eyes swept over the officers, the license plates, the makes of other cars being pulled aside, every detail stored and filed away. She knew exactly how this would begin, and she knew, with military certainty, how it would end. Officer Harris approached with short strides and narrowed eyes, his flashlight angled unnecessarily into her eyes. He didn't offer a greeting, no request, just command. License and registration. Victoria turned off her radio and nodded, her voice as steady as her breathing. "Certainly, officer. May I ask what this checkpoint is for?" His eyebrow twitched. He didn't expect questions, especially not from someone who looked like her. There was a certain script these stops followed. Black driver, obedience, search, citation, repeat. And she had already gone off script. "Routine enforcement," he said. "Just give me your ID." Victoria retrieved her license and registration with calm, deliberate movements. She held them out, her hands relaxed and visible. Harris took them and glanced down. His lips pressed together when he saw her address, Maple Avenue, Westfield Heights. "Wait here." She watched him retreat in her side mirror. He walked back to his cruiser, where another officer leaned casually against the hood. Harris held up her ID, pointed toward her car, and said something with a smirk. The other officer laughed. Then a taller figure emerged from the shadows near the command tent. He walked like someone who expected the ground to obey him. Black boots, gray uniform, square jaw. The name tag read Captain Wilson. Victoria's eyes didn't move. She saw everything. Wilson approached her window like a man addressing a subordinate, not a citizen. His voice was sharp. "Step out of the vehicle, ma'am." Victoria blinked once. Her expression didn't change. "Is there a problem with my identification, Captain?" Wilson's hand hovered near his holstered weapon. "We're conducting enhanced inspections. Step out of the car." Victoria's voice remained professional, even kind. "Enhanced inspections require reasonable suspicion of unlawful activity. I haven't been given a reason." Wilson leaned in slightly. "We decide what's suspicious." She nodded once and slowly opened her door, stepping out with the same poise she used on military tarmacs. Her shoes clicked softly against the pavement. "I'd like to note that this appears to be selective enforcement, and I do not consent to a search of my vehicle." Wilson motioned toward her hood. "Hands on the car." "I decline consent to a search without a warrant." "Look at this one," Harris said, returning from the cruiser. "Knows her amendments, probably rehearsed this in the mirror." "Fourth Amendment," Victoria clarified calmly. "And Terry v. Ohio. You'll need specific and articulable facts to justify your actions." Wilson gave a tight smile. "People from Westfield always know the rules when it's convenient." "By people, Captain?" He stepped closer. "Troublemakers." Around them, cars began to line up. Some drivers had their phones out, filming. Wilson turned to another officer and barked, "Clear the lanes, no recordings." Victoria's voice cut through the tension. "I respectfully decline your search, and I request a supervisor." "I am the supervisor," Wilson replied, then turned to Harris. "Detain her." Harris moved quickly. Before Victoria could finish turning, he grabbed her right wrist and twisted it behind her back, wrenching her shoulder. "I'm not resisting," she said clearly. "I'm complying under protest." "Stop resisting," Harris barked, though there was no resistance at all. Her left wrist was pulled back, violently cuffed. The metal bit into her skin. Her fingers clenched instinctively, but she didn't flinch. She didn't scream. She simply looked forward, lips closed, eyes steady. Wilson moved in closer. "You don't tell us how to do our jobs." "Your body camera appears to be off, Officer Harris," Victoria said. "That violates department policy." "Mind your own business," Harris snapped, yanking her cuffs tighter. Victoria didn't move. She didn't need to. Because inside the cuff of her jacket, her right thumb had pressed against a small, pressure-sensitive trigger, less than a centimeter wide, hidden beneath stitched fabric. The signal had already been sent. The device, a military-grade communicator sewn into the lining of her sleeve, activated the Pentagon's Oversight Delta protocol. The location beacon was live. Voice-activated recording had begun. Everything from this moment forward was time-stamped, stored, and monitored. Wilson leaned close to her ear. "Victoria Taylor, you're under arrest for obstruction of justice and interfering with a lawful inspection. You have the right to remain silent, though I doubt you'll use it." "I'm fully aware of my rights," she replied. "And I assume I'll be transported to Greenfield Station?" Wilson frowned. "That's right. I'll require my phone call upon arrival." "You'll get what we decide you get," Harris muttered. They shoved her forward, toward the cruiser. Her arms burned from the position, but her balance didn't falter. Her breath didn't quicken. Her voice, even in silence, carried authority. As Harris pushed her into the back seat, she caught a glimpse of the night sky between the trees, bright stars above a corrupt city. She looked at the clock on the cruiser's dash. 9:17 p.m. She smiled to herself, a soft, almost imperceptible smile. In exactly 43 minutes, this entire checkpoint would collapse like a house of cards. They didn't just arrest a black woman tonight. They arrested a 4-star general. And the nation was already watching. The metal door buzzed open, and the sounds of the outside world were instantly swallowed by the harsh fluorescence inside the Greenfield Police Department. General Victoria Taylor stepped through the threshold with Officer Harris gripping her arm, unnecessarily firm. He acted as though she might bolt, as though her stillness concealed violence. But she moved calmly, like someone who had trained her entire life for moments more dangerous than this. The booking area buzzed with casual noise. Phones ringing, printers whirring, fluorescent lights humming overhead. A bulletin board displayed smiling community posters and warnings about fentanyl. Officers leaned over desks with coffee-stained paperwork, their postures loose, their tones flippant. But when Harris walked her in, the atmosphere shifted just slightly. "Another one from Westfield," someone called from behind the booking desk. "Didn't take the hint at the checkpoint, huh? Probably thought her attitude made her invisible." The words weren't subtle. They were designed to land. Victoria heard them all but gave no reaction. She let silence work for her, and it did. In a room full of raised voices, silence becomes threatening. Harris walked her over to a scuffed linoleum counter beneath a cracked sign that read Processing Unit 2. The officer at the terminal didn't look up. "Name," he said, fingers already moving over the keyboard. "Victoria Taylor." "Address?" 2315 Maple Avenue, Westfield Heights. That made the booking officer pause. He glanced at her for the first time, eyes narrowing. Of course. He typed something else, then waved a hand toward the tray beside the fingerprint scanner. "What she got?" Harris dropped a small, clear bag on the counter. Wallet, car keys, cell phone. Didn't say much. The officer picked up her license and turned it over slowly. He held it under the light longer than necessary, like he expected it to disintegrate. "Clean record?" "She didn't say anything about that either," Harris answered. "But with that address, you know how it is." The booking officer grunted. "Yeah." He tapped the keyboard and slid the tray closer. Thumbprint. Victoria moved forward and pressed her thumb against the glass panel. It lit red, then blinked green. The machine beeped. "Step back." He scribbled something on a sheet of paper, then turned back toward the wall phone. "You get one call," he said without eye contact. "Make it count." Victoria stood at the phone with her hands behind her back, not restrained, but composed. She waited for the officer to unlock her cuffs, saying nothing. It was Harris who finally stepped in, annoyed by the silence. The key clicked into the slot, and the metal released from her wrists. She rubbed them lightly. Deep indentations where the cuffs had been, one spot dotted faintly with blood. He stood too close as she picked up the receiver. "Call your boyfriend? Or your protest buddies?" She ignored the remark. Her fingers moved quickly. She dialed the number from memory. There was no need to look anything up. 3 rings. "Operations Center, Pentagon," came the voice, crisp and formal. "Authorization code Tango Delta 794, Victoria said, low but clear. "Oversight Delta, location transmitting, 43 minutes. There was a pause, like a machine evaluating her voice and code simultaneously. "Confirmed, Oversight Delta active. General Taylor, response unit is deploying now. Timeline 43 minutes. Do you require verbal acknowledgement?" "No, I'll maintain comms blackout," she replied. The line disconnected. Victoria gently placed the phone back on its cradle. She turned back toward the center of the booking area and walked calmly to the bench, resuming her seat. The murmurs around her grew louder. What was that? Didn't sound like a lawyer. No, it didn't. Wilson had emerged from his office above the floor. He leaned on the railing, arms crossed, watching her from above. Something about the way she sat, too straight, too composed, bothered him. She wasn't confused. She wasn't scared. She wasn't even annoyed. She was documenting. Every step, every voice, every moment. He could feel it. Below him, 2 officers chuckled near the vending machine. "She really thinks she's somebody," one said. "Probably has a podcast about resisting checkpoints. Or she's trying to bait a lawsuit. Wouldn't be the first one. She acted like she knew my badge number just by glancing at me." Wilson continued watching. Her stillness was no longer impressive, it was disturbing. In the glass partition above the bullpen, a second figure appeared, Councilman Edward Bennett, suited, smiling, and deeply self-satisfied. Wilson turned toward him as he entered the upper hallway. "She's from Westfield," Wilson reported. Bennett nodded, naturally. "She's calm, too calm. Claimed obstruction, no priors. Then book her, let the courts sort it out. That's what we built the checkpoints for, to apply pressure. People slip up under pressure. She didn't. Yeah. Bennett placed a hand on Wilson's shoulder. It's one arrest. We're running a program, not a choir. Don't let her get in your head. Wilson didn't answer, but something told him this wasn't one arrest. This was something else. Victoria was led down the hallway without resistance. Her expression never changed. She walked like she was still in command, even as Officer Harris walked behind her, even as the other officers stepped aside to avoid contact. A few watched her like they were trying to figure her out. Most didn't care. They thought they knew what she was already. The cell was cold and metallic. A small bench jutted out from the wall. The single light above flickered faintly as she stepped in. "Sit tight," Harris said as he slammed the cell door behind her. She did. Her back stayed straight. She didn't lie down. She didn't pace. She didn't groan or protest or demand answers. She just waited. Outside, Harris leaned over to Wilson. "You want to process her formally now?" Wilson checked the time. 9:36 p.m. "No, let her sit a while. She made a call earlier," Harris said. "Didn't say who, not a lawyer. Did she give a name?" "Just a bunch of numbers. Something about location." 43 minutes. Wilson frowned. "You sure?" "Word for word." "Who picked up?" "Didn't say." The hallway behind them buzzed again. Officer Davis poked his head in. "Captain?" Wilson turned. "What?" "There's a vehicle outside. Black SUV, government plates, no city markings." Bennett reappeared at the end of the hall, fixing his cufflinks. "I saw it too. Probably some federal agency auditing our reports again." "They usually announce themselves," Wilson said. "Maybe it's routine," Bennett replied. But he didn't sound certain. Inside the holding cell, Victoria didn't move. She studied the floor, the screws in the bench, the vent near the ceiling. She listened for the changes in tone beyond the walls. She glanced up at the clock. 9:41 p.m. The silence was beginning to unnerve them. She could sense it. Wilson came to the glass window to look in again. She met his eyes for a moment, long enough to unsettle him, and then looked away. That small act shook him more than a threat ever could. She wasn't reacting like a victim. She was acting like a witness. And Wilson didn't realize he'd just hand-delivered his entire department into the hands of someone who wasn't just documenting injustice. She was preparing to dismantle it. Another SUV arrived. Phones began ringing at the front desk. The operator picked up line 1. "This is Greenfield Police." A voice on the other end. "This is Colonel Jackson with Pentagon oversight. I need confirmation that General Victoria Taylor is currently in your custody." The operator froze. Another phone rang. Then another. Victoria remained seated, unmoving, breathing evenly. At 9:43 p.m., she closed her eyes for one full breath. The countdown had begun, and the storm was only just approaching. 2 hours before the arrest, General Victoria Taylor stood in a secure briefing room at the Pentagon. The walls were gray. The lighting was subdued. No phones were allowed inside. In front of her, a series of digital displays scrolled through data: checkpoint locations, arrest statistics, traffic stop demographics, and internal complaints filed in the city of Greenfield. A colonel stood across from her, his arms folded, jaw tight. "This is beyond troubling," he said. "It's patterned, precise. Every checkpoint is positioned like a noose around one neighborhood." Victoria stared at the map. Red dots flared across the screen, all clustered around a single district. Westfield Heights. Her district. "They're calling it community enforcement," he continued. "But what it looks like is targeted harassment. We've had 3 service members detained in the last 6 weeks alone. No charges, no infractions, just traffic stops that turned into hours in holding." Another officer tapped on the screen. These complaints never make it past the first review tier. Internal Affairs closes them within 72 hours. No follow-up, no interviews. We traced one complaint to a civilian oversight board that, on paper, hasn't met in 2 years. Victoria looked down at the file in front of her. Dozens of affidavits, first-hand accounts, photos of bruises. A note from a military wife who said her teenage son had been held for over 10 hours after a routine checkpoint stop. She flipped the folder closed. "I'll do it." The colonel looked up. "You'll lead the oversight?" She nodded once. "I'll go in myself." There was a pause. The room went quiet. "You understand the risk," the colonel said. "They won't know who you are. You won't be in uniform. You could be assaulted." "That's the point," Victoria replied. He hesitated. "We could send a lower rank. We could assign a covert team." "No," she said. "If we want to expose the full extent of what's happening, we need the truth, and the truth only reveals itself under pressure." She looked at the screen again. One intersection blinked. The same one where the most stops occurred. The same one where every line of data converged. "That's where I'll enter," she said. The colonel gave a small nod. "You'll be monitored. Signal verification every 30 minutes. Emergency extraction authorized at any point." "I won't need it," Victoria said. "You're going in alone?" "I always have." She left the briefing room without another word. Her uniform stayed folded in a leather case by the door. Her identification card, the one she would not offer until it was too late, was tucked into her wallet alongside a secondary communicator. A digital beacon the size of a button, sewn into her jacket lining. By the time she reached the exit, her civilian profile had been uploaded into the internal logs. She was no longer General Taylor. She was just Victoria from Westfield. Before heading into Greenfield, Victoria took a detour through Westfield Heights. She parked her car 2 blocks from the checkpoint and walked the rest of the way. She stopped by a local community center, a faded building with a cracked mural on its side and a line of folding chairs set up out front. Inside, the mood was quiet but tense. Parents spoke in hushed voices. Children played in a corner with second-hand toys. A poster on the wall read, "Know Your Rights" in bold lettering, though some of the pamphlets had been taken down and replaced with flyers for free legal aid. An organizer named Marcus recognized her. "General Taylor?" Victoria gave a small nod. "Today I'm just Victoria." He didn't ask why. He simply led her into a small meeting room where a group of residents had gathered. There were maybe 10 people, 5 women, 3 men, 1 teenager, and an elderly woman wearing a scarf tied tight around her head. They didn't waste time with pleasantries. The room had no space for ceremony. A woman named Patrice spoke first. "My husband lost his job, not because of anything he did, just because he kept being late. And why was he late? Checkpoint, always the checkpoint, pulled over 3 times in 1 month. He's never even had a speeding ticket." A young man followed. "They stopped me 2 blocks from my house, asked if I had warrants. I told them no. They searched the car anyway, said they had discretion. I asked to call someone and they said I was interfering. They cuffed me in front of my little brother." An older woman raised her hand slowly. Her voice was thin but firm. "They arrested me on my way to the grocery store. Said my license looked suspicious. I've lived here 50 years. They made me sit on the curb while people walked by." Another man said, "My cousin got pulled over and never made it home that night. No charges, no record. They just kept him till morning." Victoria listened. She didn't speak. She didn't interrupt. She looked each person in the eye, let their words land, let their anger rise. She understood the power of silence when it was deliberate, when it made space. The elderly woman leaned forward. "They want us scared," she said, "and it's working. My grandson won't even walk to school without me riding behind him." Victoria nodded slowly. "And when you report it?" "Goes nowhere," Patrice said. "The complaint form is a joke. You file it and no one ever follows up. If you push, they tell you it's being handled. Then you never hear again." Victoria reached into her bag and handed them a secure card. "This is a direct channel," she said. "Whatever happens tonight, use that line. It's monitored by my office. No one in this city can intercept it." Marcus looked down at the card. "So it's tonight?" She stood. "It starts tonight, but it doesn't end tonight." They didn't ask what she meant, but in their eyes, something shifted. Not hope, but expectation. Someone had finally come to see them. Someone wasn't afraid. As dusk approached, Victoria returned to her car. She removed her military watch and replaced it with the encoded one. She slipped into her civilian jacket. She set the digital recorder to standby. The GPS beacon began transmitting location pulses every 10 seconds. She took one last look at the photos stored on her secure phone. The map, the complaint logs, the council's meeting notes, Captain Wilson's personnel record, and, most importantly, a redacted transcript from a body camera that mysteriously malfunctioned during a prior Westfield checkpoint encounter, one that matched Officer Harris's voice. Then she shut the phone off. She didn't need it anymore. She knew what she was walking into. She drove with the windows down, letting the air move through the car like a cleansing breeze. Street by street, she passed reminders of why this mattered. A boy carrying a trumpet case, a mother holding groceries with one hand, her child's wrist in the other, a line of teens waiting at a bus stop. And all of them, every one, looked toward Greenfield like it was something to survive. As she approached the checkpoint, she kept her eyes forward. She didn't look at the officers. She didn't hesitate. Her window rolled down automatically. She pulled her license from the glove box and held it in her right hand. Her left thumb hovered just beneath her sleeve, over the trigger embedded in the scene. Then Officer Harris appeared, and everything began. Now inside the holding cell, Victoria sat as if carved from stone. Her breathing was slow, her eyes steady. The voices outside blurred into background noise. She reviewed everything, every face, every word, every movement. The laughter when they read her address, the way Harris twisted her wrist, the way Wilson didn't blink when she said she knew the law, the crack in their confidence when she refused to be rattled. This wasn't just an operation. It was a revelation. And in 31 minutes, the rest of the world would see exactly what had been hiding inside the walls of Greenfield. She wasn't just watching them. She was documenting the collapse. And the truth would arrive on time. The interrogation room smelled like bleach and something older, something institutional. The single bulb above flickered intermittently, casting sharp shadows against the cinder block walls. A metal table stood bolted to the floor in the center of the room, two mismatched chairs on either side. Victoria Taylor sat in one, her hands loosely resting on the table, wrists still red from the cuffs. She said nothing. She didn't shift or fidget, she simply waited. The door creaked open. Captain Wilson stepped inside with the swagger of a man who believed he already knew the outcome. He closed the door slowly behind him, letting it click shut like punctuation. In his hand, he held a slim file folder, creased and curling at the corners. Her belongings. He dropped the folder onto the table with a flat slap. Papers spilled slightly, the corner of her license peeking out. Wilson didn't sit. He stood beside the table, towering slightly over her. "You know," he said casually, "most folks who get pulled at the checkpoint, they act surprised, confused, sometimes angry. You? Not a word, not even a flinch." Victoria looked at him. "I'd like to speak with legal counsel before any questioning." Wilson chuckled. "Oh, we're just talking. No need for lawyers yet." "I invoke my right to counsel," she repeated. He shook his head. "That's not how this works." She tilted her head slightly. "That's exactly how this works." Wilson stepped around the table and pulled out the chair across from her, settling into it slowly. "All right," he said, placing his palms flat on the surface. "Let's just get to it. You gave us some ID, but I'm going to tell you what I see when I look at it." He pulled her military identification card from the file and held it up to the light. Victoria Taylor, he read. Marine Corps. 4-star general. He raised an eyebrow. You expect me to believe that? I expect you to verify it. He laughed. Lady, if this ID were real, half of Washington would be knocking on our door. She didn't reply. Wilson leaned in, still holding the card between 2 fingers. 4 stars? He said with mock admiration. What are you pretending to be, the Secretary of Defense? She met his gaze without blinking. You're holding a valid military credential, Captain. You're mocking it on a recorded device. Wilson glanced at the ceiling. There are no recordings in here. That's a policy violation, she said quietly. Interrogation rooms are required to be monitored under City Code 326, subparagraph A. He laughed again, but it was thinner this time. You really do think you're special? No, Victoria said. You do. The door opened again, and Officer Harris stepped inside, holding a clipboard. He didn't sit. He stood beside Wilson, looming. She's ready for paperwork, Harris said. All we need is a signature. Wilson nodded. He slid a single sheet of paper across the table toward Victoria. This is a written confession to obstruction and refusal to comply with a lawful checkpoint inspection, he explained. It's a Class B misdemeanor. You sign this, you're out in the morning. Victoria didn't touch the paper. I won't sign anything without counsel present. Harris rolled his eyes. Here we go again. Wilson tapped the paper with one finger. Look, I get it. You want to make a point. But all this legal grandstanding? It doesn't end well for people like you. People like me? People who confuse real authority with make-believe rights. Victoria didn't respond. She folded her hands. Wilson sat back in his chair, clearly agitated. You want to play hardball? Fine, let's do it your way. He stood up and began pacing slowly. Let me tell you what happens next. We book you formally. You spend a few nights in county. Maybe the press catches wind of it, maybe they don't. But we'll make sure that record sticks to you. Resisting checkpoint authority, you'll be labeled, flagged. Every time you step into a city building, you'll be that woman from Westfield with the attitude. Victoria's voice remained calm. Your threats are noted. Harris leaned closer. Do you know how many people come through here trying to sound smart? Yes, she said. I read the intake logs. That shut them up for a moment. From behind the one-way glass, Councilman Bennett watched the exchange with growing impatience. She's just another checkpoint resistor, he muttered. Overeducated, probably worked somewhere respectable once and thinks it makes her bulletproof. Wilson, back in the room, pulled her wallet out again. He rifled through the contents, intentionally careless. Credit cards, a folded receipt, a photo of a young boy, tucked away behind an old DC Metro card. Then he pulled out her military identification once more. You know, he said, holding it up again, it's actually a crime to impersonate a federal officer, especially a military one. You're dangerously close to obstructing a federal investigation, Victoria said flatly. Wilson paused. That word hung in the air, investigation. Something shifted in his posture. Not much, but it was there. Then his phone buzzed. He checked the screen, saw the caller ID. Pentagon switchboard. His eyes narrowed. He let it ring. Probably a prank, he said aloud, tossing the phone onto the desk without answering it. Victoria glanced at it briefly, then looked back at Wilson. You should have taken that call. Harris scoffed. Is that supposed to scare us? No, she said softly. It's supposed to give you one last chance. The door opened again. Detective David Morales stepped in. He was younger than Wilson, mid-30s maybe, wearing a brown jacket over a gray button-up shirt. His badge was clipped to his belt, and a leather folder rested under his arm. He looked like someone who still believed in paperwork. He glanced around the room and took in the layout. Wilson standing, Harris pacing, Taylor seated but composed. Sorry to interrupt, Morales said. Captain, can I have a word? Wilson turned. We're in the middle of something. It's important. Wilson huffed and followed Morales out into the hallway. Outside, Morales opened his folder. Inside was a printout of Taylor's ID from the processing system. "I ran her information through our usual protocols," Morales said. "Nothing came back, no matches, no flags." "So?" Wilson asked. "So, I took a look at her ID myself," Morales said. "The one she gave at the checkpoint." Wilson rolled his eyes. "Yeah, the fake one." "It's not fake," Morales said. Wilson blinked. "Excuse me? I did a background in military identification back when I worked in DC before I transferred here. Her ID has microtext, holographic overlays, a UV watermark, and serials that check out against current Department of Defense formats." "You're saying it's real?" "I'm saying if it's fake, it's the best fake I've ever seen, and you don't waste that kind of effort unless the original is real." Wilson's jaw tightened. "She claimed to be a general," Morales added, "and I'm starting to think she might be telling the truth." Wilson looked away. "It doesn't matter. She resisted." Morales frowned. "She quoted Supreme Court decisions, cited state and federal policy. She asked for counsel and made no attempt to flee. That's not resisting, that's knowing your rights." Wilson took a step forward. "We're not backing down on this, you got that?" Morales didn't answer. Inside the interrogation room, Victoria sat alone. Her eyes flicked toward the ceiling. She could sense the shift outside, like pressure changing before a storm. She heard footsteps return. Wilson walked in again, followed by Morales. Morales walked slowly to the table and looked at the file. He picked up her ID, turned it over under the light, and held it at an angle. "The details are authentic," he said quietly. "Captain, this ID has military encryption markings and a 4-star insignia." Wilson scowled. "So she stole it?" "Or," Morales said, "she is who she says she is." Victoria looked up at Morales. Their eyes met for the first time. Something passed between them, recognition, a quiet understanding. "Ma'am," Morales said carefully, "can you confirm your full name and rank?" "General Victoria Taylor, United States Marine Corps." Wilson snorted. "You're still playing this game." Morales turned. "Captain, if she's an active military officer, we've just committed serious violations. Denial of counsel, mockery of ID, coercion without legal representation, and deliberate misuse of detention procedures." Wilson's voice rose. "I don't care who she says she is. She's under arrest." "You can't ignore this," Morales said. "We're already in dangerous territory." Wilson picked up the phone again, finally reading the call log. 7 missed calls, all listed from different DoD extensions. He started to speak but was interrupted by the intercom. "Captain Wilson, front desk, you're needed urgently." Wilson didn't move. Victoria stood. "You still think this ends the way you planned?" He didn't answer. Morales looked toward her. "General, do you require legal representation at this time?" "I won't be the one needing it," she replied. And for the first time, Wilson had no reply. Detective Morales stood in the hallway outside the interrogation room, one hand on the railing, the other gripping the military ID tighter than necessary. The fluorescent lights above him buzzed faintly as he tapped his phone screen with urgency, pulling up a secure portal through his department's restricted access system. His badge number granted him clearance to search federal databases for law enforcement validation, but that wasn't going to be enough. He needed more. Morales turned on his heel and walked briskly down the corridor to his desk in the back office. He passed by a few distracted patrol officers and sat down at his workstation. He entered a second-layer credential code, one he hadn't used in years, back when he worked temporary assignment with military liaison units in DC before transferring out west. A login screen blinked. He typed in her ID number exactly as it appeared on the card. A few seconds passed. Then the screen loaded. Victoria E. Taylor, it read. General, United States Marine Corps, active duty. The photo on the profile matched the woman in the interrogation room. Morales exhaled, his heart picking up speed. He clicked deeper. Decorations: Defense Distinguished Service Medal, Silver Star. Bronze Star with Valor. Combat tours in Iraq, Afghanistan, and classified overseas operations. Appointed to head of Pentagon Civil Liberties Task Force 18 months ago. She wasn't just a general. She was one of the highest-ranking women in the Department of Defense, a decorated warfighter and federal authority on civil-military affairs. Morales leaned back in his chair. Everything made sense now. Her silence, her precision, her calm in the face of arrogance. He tapped a number into his desk phone. The line connected with a light beep. "Lieutenant," he said, speaking to dispatch, "patch me through to Captain Wilson, urgently." He stood up, ID in hand. He was done doubting. He was done watching this department dig itself deeper into the grave. It was time to act. Captain Wilson stood at the front desk, jaw tight, one hand hovering over the counter as he scanned through the growing number of missed calls on his phone. 4 of them were from DC area codes. One came directly from the Department of Defense switchboard. Another had no number at all, just the label Restricted Clearance Level 2. He didn't know what Level 2 meant, but the pit in his stomach did. Bennett, the councilman, leaned over the desk behind him, eyes wild with a sheen of sweat already gathering on his forehead. "Do you think she really is who she says she is?" Bennett asked under his breath. Wilson exhaled sharply. "It's a bluff. Has to be. There's no way a 4-star general would just show up here without alerting someone." "That doesn't mean she didn't," Morales said, approaching from behind. Wilson turned around. Morales didn't flinch. "What?" Wilson barked. Morales raised the ID card. "It's real. I ran it through internal and military secure access." Wilson stepped closer. "You what?" "She's not pretending. Her credentials are valid. She's active duty. She's a 4-star general, and she was sent here for a reason." Bennett's mouth fell open. No, this can't be real." Wilson held up his hand. "Even if the card's real, it could have been stolen. You know how many people carry fake badges or find old IDs online?" Morales shook his head. "It's not just the ID. It's her demeanor, her knowledge, her bearing." Wilson scoffed. "What does that even mean?" "It means," Morales said, "you're staring down a woman who's led men into combat zones under sniper fire. She's not here for games. She's here because someone up high sent her to see how far this town has fallen." Bennett looked panicked now, pulling at his collar. "They've called 5 times. What do we do?" Wilson looked cornered, but still angry. "You don't back down now," he muttered. "If we cave, it confirms everything she wants. That we're weak, that we blink under pressure." Morales stepped forward. "What we do now determines if this is a scandal or a federal incident." Bennett wiped his forehead. "They're going to come here, aren't they?" "I think they're already on their way," Morales said. "And if we're still treating her like a suspect when they arrive, we're not going to have jobs. We're going to have indictments." Wilson slammed his fist on the desk. "Fine." Morales gave a tight nod. He turned and walked back toward the holding cell hallway with purposeful strides. He didn't wait for permission. He didn't need it anymore. Victoria Taylor sat silently in the holding cell, her fingers laced together, elbows resting lightly on her knees. The walls around her echoed faintly with muffled voices, hurried footsteps, and the sharp clack of a badge against a belt. She didn't look up when the door opened. She knew who it was before he spoke. "General Lemra," said softly. She looked up then. For a second, nothing moved in her face. Then the faintest glimmer of understanding passed through her eyes. Acknowledgement. Respect. "I apologize for what you've experienced here," Morales continued. "It never should have happened. I confirmed your credentials." Victoria nodded once. "Thank you, Detective." Morales pulled a key ring from his pocket and unlocked the holding cell. The heavy latch clicked open. He stepped aside. "I believe you're due far more than an apology, ma'am." She stepped out, rubbing her wrist where the handcuffs had left a mark. Morales noticed. His jaw clenched. They began walking. As they reached the corner of the hallway, Wilson appeared, his face red, jaw stiff, eyes darting. Morales paused. "Captain." Wilson glanced at Taylor but said nothing. "Military verification has confirmed her identity," Morales said firmly. "She's a 4-star general under active federal deployment. Any further detainment would be obstruction." Wilson raised his chin. "I was just following protocol." "You were denying legal rights," Taylor said. Bennett appeared behind them, out of breath and pale. "General Taylor," he said, forcing a smile that couldn't hide his panic. "Please, accept our deepest apologies. I'm sure you understand, this was all a misunderstanding." Taylor didn't smile. "Your officers mocked my credentials, violated my civil rights, denied me access to counsel, and ignored direct federal contact. This isn't a misunderstanding, it's misconduct." Bennett raised his hands. "Let's all take a breath. I'd like to speak with you, maybe in my office?" "No," Taylor said. She turned back to Morales. "Do you have a phone I may use?" He handed her his department-issued cell. She dialed a number from memory. "This is General Taylor," she said into the phone. "I've made contact. Confirmed that the subject location meets criteria for escalation. Prepare the team for arrival." She handed the phone back to Morales. Wilson and Bennett both stared, frozen in place. She turned to Morales again. "Would you kindly remove the cuffs from my file photo?" Morales nodded, walking back toward the intake desk where her mugshot had just been uploaded. As he passed the interrogation room, he glanced once more through the one-way glass. Wilson's reflection stared back at him, no longer the one in control. The silence was broken by the chirp of the front intercom. "Captain Wilson," the voice said, "we have unmarked vehicles pulling into the lot, multiple agencies. One of them is..." Taylor straightened her shoulders. "This station is now under federal scrutiny," she said, "effective immediately." Wilson stood stiffly. "I was just trying to keep order." "You were trying to keep control," she said, "and now you've lost both." Morales unlocked the final record, her personal items. He handed her back the badge, the watch, and her silver ID case. She clipped it to her belt, and just like that, the room shifted. It wasn't about her silence anymore. It was about the noise that was coming next. The sirens weren't loud, but they were synchronized. 3 unmarked black SUVs moved with the precision of a presidential convoy, slowing only as they approached the narrow gate to the Greenfield Police Department. Military license plates. 2 military police Humvees followed close behind, flanking the vehicles like shields. A 3rd Humvee pulled up with a mounted comms array, the lot flooded with movement. From the front desk, Officer Lin watched the screen connected to the external lot camera. Her hand hovered over the phone, but didn't move. She had never seen anything like this, not even during drills or special training sessions. In the rear office, Captain Wilson stood motionless, his eyes locked on the feed. He had no idea who was in the SUVs, but the insignias on the uniforms stepping out of the vehicles were clear. Pentagon. Civil Operations Division. Colonel David Jackson exited the lead SUV, his gait crisp and direct. A tall black man in his early 50s, with a chest full of ribbons and a silver command pin, Jackson didn't break stride as he reached the front doors. 2 officers opened them for him, their badges catching the sunlight. Inside the station, tension hung like fog. General Victoria Taylor stood in the center hallway. She didn't speak as Jackson approached. She didn't salute. She didn't need to. Jackson stopped before her and offered a nod of affirmation. "Ma'am," he said, voice firm, "we are under your direction." Taylor nodded once. "Begin the extraction." Jackson turned toward the commandos behind him and spoke into his comms. "Secure the perimeter, lock communications, turn the conference room." The soldiers moved like a wave, purposeful, silent, trained. Wilson finally stepped forward, face flushed with confusion and pride struggling to stay intact. "What the hell is this?" he said. "You can't just roll in here without coordination." Colonel Jackson turned to face him. Actually, we can, he said. We're acting under federal civil authority and emergency command protocol. This station is now under Article 6 oversight. Wilson blinked. Article what? Article 6, Taylor said, her voice calm but final. When local departments are found to be violating constitutional civil liberties under federally protected investigations, federal military supervision is authorized. You're not running this station anymore. I am. Wilson looked around, expecting someone to back him up. Harris stood near the door looking pale. Bennett had disappeared down a hallway. No one spoke. The military was no longer knocking. It was inside. The Greenfield Police Department's conference room had been converted in under 10 minutes. A portable server terminal hummed against the back wall. Screens lit up across one side, displaying command channels, real-time surveillance feeds, and network traffic mapping. A logistics officer rolled out sealed evidence crates and began organizing them by case file ID. Taylor stood at the head of the long table, flanked by Colonel Jackson and 2 DoD intelligence officers. The air smelled faintly of toner, sweat, and disinfectant, old power being replaced by something colder and sharper. Wilson, still trying to reclaim footing, burst into the room. You can't just take over our records. That's protected information. Taylor looked at him, then turned to the sergeant at the terminal. We're in. We've bypassed the internal firewall. All department files are now mirrored on secure servers. Live replication is ongoing. Jackson turned to Wilson. You locked the doors on a federal agent. You denied her rights. You ignored 5 calls from the Pentagon. We're well past protocol. Wilson's mouth opened, then shut. Harris stood behind him, her expression unreadable. Bennett pushed through the door moments later, blazer unbuttoned, tie askew. He tried to inject charm into his voice. Look, clearly some miscommunication happened. I think we should all take a breath, coordinate through the mayor's office, or... You have no jurisdiction, Taylor said, cutting him off. This town's elected government signed on to Operation Civic Sentinel 8 months ago. That operation falls under federal contract review, which means your city has already agreed to federal compliance checks, especially in the event of misconduct. Jackson stepped forward, placing a thick binder on the table. It was marked with a red tab and seal. DoD Oversight Packet, signed by Mayor James Stone, dated January 14. Bennett's voice cracked. He never told me. Taylor's tone didn't waver. He didn't need to. You're not the mayor. The silence that followed was complete. One of the Pentagon staffers turned toward the monitors, pulling files from March through present, pattern analysis beginning. Start with checkpoint incident reports, Taylor said. Match them to arrest records. Flag any mention of Westfield or zip code 94,221. Copy that. In the corner, a tech officer slid a stack of physical intake files onto the table. One was already circled in red. Taylor picked it up. Her eyes scanned the highlighted memo. A typed note from Wilson's office. Priority: focus on vehicles registered to Westfield District. Quota: 8 per week. She read it twice. And then again. Her jaw tightened. The silence ended. Across the station, military police had taken soft control of each department room. Officers were not removed, but they were replaced. At every computer terminal, a federal liaison sat beside the department employee. The message was clear. You may stay, but you will no longer act alone. Morales stood in the booking area, flipping through a physical logbook with one of the Pentagon analysts. Here, Morales said, pointing to the entry line. This is when she was brought in. No timestamp on the phone call logs. They denied her a call. The analyst nodded. We're matching this to internal video feeds. Taylor entered the room behind them, holding a new printout. Detective Morales, she said, I need you to walk me through the checkpoint deployment order from 3 months ago. He nodded, pulling out a copy from the intake folder. This was pushed by Councilman Bennett. Technically, it was for traffic control, but unofficially, everyone knew it targeted drivers from the Westfield neighborhood. Taylor's voice dropped. Do you have any documentation of that? Morales hesitated. There's more. Quotas. They were spoken but never printed. But I know Officer Reyes. He kept audio logs. He hated this system. Taylor turned to the analyst. Find Officer Reyes's locker. Extract all digital logs. The analyst nodded and moved. In the conference room, another Pentagon technician flagged a series of video timestamps from holding cell footage. Taylor returned just in time to watch. The video showed her being brought in, silent, cuffed, offered no explanation. Wilson's voice in the footage: "Get her processed. Don't give her a phone. Let her sit. If she wants to play games, we'll show her who's in charge." Jackson exhaled, rubbing his temple. Unbelievable. Another technician raised a hand. Here's something worse. He played a second clip, this time from an internal briefing. Bennett, seated in a conference chair, said flatly, "Westfield is the problem. If we can lean on traffic stops and make them feel watched, they'll police themselves." Taylor stood motionless, every inch of her body taut. "You're going to want to see the intake files from last week," the analyst added. He slid them over. Page after page of arrests, all under vague pretense: failure to signal, license plate obstruction, vehicle matching suspect description. Every address listed? Westfield. Taylor looked up. "They weren't running a checkpoint," she said. "They were running a funnel." Jackson looked at her. "How far do we take this?" Taylor didn't blink. "All the way." The conference room door opened again. A young military assistant entered, holding an encrypted tablet. "Ma'am," she said, "Washington is requesting a briefing. They've been monitoring the data dump live." Taylor nodded. "Patch them through." She stepped aside as the screen shifted. A secure line connected. The voice came through, clear, precise, and firm. "This is Undersecretary Hall. We've reviewed the first wave of documents. Confirmed jurisdiction. General Taylor, you are hereby authorized to initiate full federal review under the Civil Rights Enforcement Directive, effective immediately." Taylor stood straight. "Understood, sir." "Be advised," the voice continued, "media outlets have started to pick up chatter about unusual activity in Greenfield. We expect questions within the hour." "Let them come," Taylor said. "They'll get their answers." As the line disconnected, the room was silent again, this time in awe. And the station that once cuffed her was now her command. And she had just begun. The room was silent until the first number appeared on the screen. 89%. The Pentagon analyst didn't flinch as he clicked through the graphs. Based on checkpoint logs from the last 13 months, 89% of vehicle stops were conducted on black drivers, despite comprising less than 30% of Greenfield's population. Councilman Bennett's lips parted, just slightly. A bead of sweat rolled behind his ear. Harris stiffened in the corner. Wilson crossed his arms, but said nothing. General Victoria Taylor sat motionless at the head of the table. Her hands were folded. Her uniform jacket had been returned to her. Her rank clear now, not just in the 4 stars on her shoulders, but in the silence she commanded. She hadn't needed to raise her voice once. The analyst tapped again. "This graph shows outcomes by race. Black drivers were 4 times more likely to be searched. Of those searches, only 7% yielded any contraband or violations." Another tap. A long pause. "For white drivers, 71% of searches yielded actual violations, yet they were searched far less often." You could hear someone swallow across the room. Colonel Jackson leaned forward, arms braced on the table. "Explain the discrepancy." No one spoke. Taylor turned her head slowly, looking to Morales. He stepped forward. He placed a small USB drive on the table. "This," Morales said carefully, "contains the checkpoint scheduling data I copied before access was revoked, and video files you haven't seen yet." He clicked his laptop open, brought up a folder marked Internal 2025. A Bodycam video began playing. Rain. Headlights. Harse's voice, clipped and casual. "Plate looks clean, but it's Westfield. Let's make the stop stick. Find something." The video kept playing. You could hear the sound of a door opening, a mother's voice trying to calm her daughter in the back seat. "I'm just trying to get to work." "You from Westfield?" "Yes, but..." "License and registration now." The screen went dark. Another video replaced it, this one from Wilson. He was laughing, actually laughing. Found a vape pen under the seat, boom, possession. Next. The silence in the room grew heavier. The Pentagon analyst resumed. "Our audit confirms several patterns. Stops were not random. Vehicles with Westfield Heights registration were specifically flagged." He brought up a memo on screen. It was internal, unofficial, but real. A line was highlighted: "Ensure visibility in Westfield corridors. Focus on income risk indicators. Prioritize enforcement optics." Taylor leaned back, her voice calm but cutting. "In plain English?" The analyst nodded. "They were targeting people who looked poor and black." No one blinked. Bennett cleared his throat. That's a misinterpretation. We needed to maintain safety in transition zones. There's been crime." Taylor's gaze cut across the table. "You don't get to lecture me about crime, Councilman. Not when you weaponize traffic enforcement to punish a zip code." Morales looked like he wanted to speak, but held back. The next slide did it for him. He showed a direct link between checkpoint schedules and zoning changes. Each high enforcement weekend aligned perfectly with meetings between Bennett and a local development group. Greenfield Urban Renewal Coalition. Taylor narrowed her eyes. She'd seen their name before, in the federal housing complaints. "Show the emails," she said. The analyst nodded. Another file opened. Bennett's voice came through first, recorded in a phone call. "Look, if property values drop in Westfield, that's a win for all of us. Makes acquisition easier. Tell Wilson to keep the stops tight." Wilson's eyes widened. "What the hell is this?" But it was his voice that came next. "I've got officers on rotation. We'll squeeze them. Make Westfield hot. No one wants to live near police lights." The room froze. Taylor stood. "I want every file downloaded, every checkpoint report, every citation." Colonel Jackson motioned to his team. They moved fast. Morales exhaled, his face pale, but his eyes locked on Wilson. And for the first time, Wilson looked afraid. The second video was worse. On screen, Wilson and Harris were leaning against the hood of a squad car. It was Bodycam footage, but tilted slightly, like the camera had been shoved aside or forgotten. Their voices were unmistakable. "I don't care if she's just going to Walgreens," Harris muttered, chewing on a toothpick. "She's got Westfield tags, she gets pulled." Wilson chuckled. "And if she mouths off, she gets booked." A beat of silence, and then Harris added, "That's the program. Make it inconvenient to live over there. So they move." Taylor turned toward Morales. "Was this submitted as part of any internal review?" He shook his head. "No, ma'am. These were flagged as training footage and buried in non-evidence archives. I only found them because I dug into mislabeled directories." "On whose authority?" Morales hesitated. "Technically no one's. I got tired of the lies." Taylor gave him a nod, not approval, but something more solemn, an acknowledgement. Then another file came up. This one wasn't video, it was audio, dated 6 weeks before her arrival. Councilman Bennett's voice again. "The element is contained in Westfield, keep it there. If they push into central Greenfield, crack down." There was a long pause. Then another voice, one not previously identified. "Understood. We'll escalate traffic enforcement. Make it clear they're not welcome." The room stayed silent, but the implication echoed loud. Element, a word choice that stripped dignity. That flattened a community into a problem to be controlled. The analyst clicked forward again, pulling up internal directives marked "Command Channel Only." These were meant for ranking officers only. Wilson, Harris, and the now retired chief. They included quotas: 5 stops per shift, 2 citations minimum, exceptions granted only for priority unit interactions, a phrase later cross-referenced with race-coded data. Taylor looked around the table. These aren't just numbers, these are lives disrupted. Jobs lost, records ruined, families destabilized. Harris looked down. Wilson stared at the wall. Morales stood up. He inserted a second USB. This one bore no label. I wasn't planning on showing this, but it matters. Taylor gave him a slow nod. On screen, a spreadsheet appeared. Over 200 complaint files. Each one stamped resolved. But as Morales clicked into them, it became clear. None had been investigated. Each entry was rubber-stamped by one person, Lieutenant Craig Harris. One line read, "Driver claims racial bias dismissed, officer credibility intact." Another, "Detainee cited discomfort with prolonged stop, determined non-credible." Morales spoke, his voice low but steady. These weren't reviewed, they were dismissed automatically. Anyone who mentioned race had their case discarded. Taylor's eyes narrowed. Who else knew? Morales hesitated. Internal Affairs didn't investigate any of this, because the complaints never made it that far. Jackson stiffened. And how long has this been going on? 2.5 years. Taylor stepped away from the table. He stood facing the wall for a moment, then turned back around. Put up the housing map. The analyst complied. A color-coded map appeared. Red for low property values, green for high development interest, salt green for slate interest. Westfield Heights was bleeding red. Each checkpoint matched a corner. Every stop was a pin. Every pin an intended destabilization. "Bennett," Taylor said flatly, "you engineered this." The councilman stood, stammering. I was trying to improve Greenfield. You don't understand the crime rates, the complaints I get." "You mean the ones you manufactured?" she asked. She didn't shout. She didn't need to. Just then, a quiet chime rang out. The Pentagon liaison stepped into the room. He handed Taylor a printed memo, thick, stamped, and sealed. She read the cover page aloud. "Preliminary joint findings, Department of Justice and Department of Defense. Subject, Greenfield Police Department Checkpoint Program." A second chime. Another document delivered. She opened this one slowly. Her eyes scanned the page, then locked on Wilson. "Captain Marcus Wilson, you are officially under federal investigation for willful violation of civil rights under color of law." Wilson's mouth dropped. "Wait. You don't have jurisdiction." Colonel Jackson stepped forward. "We do now." Councilman Bennett backed toward the wall, color draining from his face. Taylor turned to him next. "Your communications with developers, your emails outlining the intentional displacement of Westfield residents, those are now part of a federal investigation." He opened his mouth, but no sound came. Outside, military vehicles remained idling. Inside, files kept pouring in, evidence that painted a picture too dark to ignore. Taylor sat once more at the head of the table. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. The system they built was unraveling, thread by thread, and now there was no stopping what was coming next. The Capitol hearing room was standing room only. Cameras lined the back wall, journalists filled the gallery, and lawmakers leaned forward with sharpened attention. But in the middle of that storm, General Victoria Taylor stood calm, composed, and ironclad in her dress blues. 4 stars gleamed on her shoulders. A chest full of medals told a lifetime of sacrifice. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. Her presence carried the weight of everything this nation claimed to value: discipline, honor, truth. I was detained without probable cause at a domestic checkpoint. My rank, my record, and my rights were disregarded. But this story isn't just about me. This is about every American who has been treated as suspect for simply existing in the wrong zip code. Silence. Then the flashbulbs erupted. Behind her on the screen, the senators displayed the evidence. Bodycam footage, arrest stats, internal emails. financial spreadsheets, racial targeting heat maps. It wasn't a case anymore. It was a mirror held up to the soul of the nation. Taylor didn't falter. I volunteered for this assignment because I needed to see it myself. I needed to feel what our people feel, and I did. I was dismissed, mocked, humiliated. But I was also listened to, not by the men who put me in cuffs, but by the law, and by those who still believe in it. She locked eyes with Senator Fields, who chaired the hearing. He nodded once and spoke into his mic. "General Taylor, your testimony will shape the next phase of our civil rights response in this country. We thank you for your courage." Moments later, the proposed legislation was announced. The Equitable Enforcement Act. It would create mandatory federal oversight for any municipal checkpoint program receiving federal funds. It would ban enforcement quotas tied to geographic demographics. And it would mandate Bodycam footage be automatically reviewed in all stops that result in detainment or arrest. In short, it was accountability with teeth. News outlets were already pushing headlines as Taylor walked out of the chamber. 4-star general detained in small-town scandal. Greenfield under fire. Checkpoint programs nationwide facing reckoning. But none of the noise touched her. Not yet. Not until she stepped into the hallway and saw a familiar face waiting. "Detective Morales," she said with a gentle nod. He wasn't in uniform anymore, just a dark blazer, clean-shaven, his posture a little taller than before. She noticed a visitor badge on his chest that read, "Guest of Committee." "I got your invitation," he said, smiling sheepishly. "Didn't think they'd actually want to hear from me." "They did," she replied, "and they will again." A moment passed between them, one of those quiet recognitions that didn't require words. He was no longer part of the machine, he was something else now. "They offered me a role in the FBI," he finally said. "Civil Rights Division." Taylor raised an eyebrow. "And what did you say?" "I said yes, I want to help. I'm done with silence." She nodded once, slowly. "Good, we need more people who know what silence costs." They walked together down the corridor as the buzz of cameras and voices echoed behind them, but ahead of them there was something else. Momentum, change, a reckoning that had only just begun. Back in Greenfield, the world was watching, and they weren't silent anymore. The protests began at dawn. Outside Greenfield Police Department, a sea of people filled the sidewalks. Handmade signs rose into the air like defiant flags, each one bearing names, slogans, and demands. "We are not targets. Justice for Westfield. No more checkpoints." The chants echoed through the narrow streets, a pulsing rhythm of outrage and hope. National news vans parked alongside food trucks. Civil rights attorneys in sharp suits stood beside grandmothers in church dresses. College students held hands with laid-off workers. It wasn't just a protest, it was a convergence. Every grievance, every suppressed voice, every quiet humiliation now had a shared name: Greenfield. Inside the courthouse, the mayor's office phones never stopped ringing. Outside, a mural was being painted on a brick wall. A portrait of General Taylor, standing tall in uniform with her hand raised. Not in salute, but in refusal. The national attention had brought new energy to old wounds. Local families who had long stayed silent began to step forward. Stories emerged, some recent, others decades old. A young mother recounted how her husband had been detained 3 times in 1 month driving home from night shift. An elderly veteran wept as he described being handcuffed outside a pharmacy. A school teacher whispered that her son had dropped out because he was afraid of being arrested just for walking to class. But the stories weren't just being told, they were being documented. Civil rights organizations began collecting testimonies, linking them with arrest records, and building legal cases. The class action movement swept through Greenfield like a rising tide. Within a week, over 140 families had signed on. At the front of it all stood Javier Morales, the detective's younger brother, and a seasoned civil rights attorney from Atlanta. He had left behind a lucrative practice to return home, and this time he wasn't coming as an observer, he was coming for justice. "We have evidence of systemic profiling, discriminatory intent, and deliberate suppression of complaints," he declared during a press conference. "This isn't just negligence. This is organized abuse under the guise of public safety, and we will prove it." Behind him stood his brother, now in a plain gray suit, no badge, no gun, just presence, just purpose. General Taylor released a brief statement in support. "The law is not an instrument of fear. The American people deserve enforcement without bias and leadership without corruption. I stand with the families of Greenfield." And just like that, the story went from local scandal to national movement. Social media lit up. Hashtags like "Justice for Greenfield," "Checkpoints Exposed," and "Her Silence Spoke" trended for days. Celebrities weighed in. Civil rights leaders called for congressional support. Retired military officers released a joint letter condemning the treatment of General Taylor. Even international outlets picked up the story. For Councilman Bennett, the walls were closing in. Days after Taylor's testimony, federal prosecutors announced an indictment. Bennett was charged with conspiracy to violate civil rights, obstruction of justice, abuse of municipal office, and financial fraud. The evidence was overwhelming. Emails detailing racial targeting, budget memos showing coordination with developers, audio files of Bennett urging officers to keep the element in Westfield. It was not just racism. It was strategy. Bennett was arrested quietly in his office, escorted out in handcuffs as a local reporter shouted, "Do you have anything to say to the families?" He didn't. The image of him being led past the mural of Taylor, his head down, her face raised, went viral in hours. But General Taylor didn't gloat. She didn't attend the press conference or give a victory speech. She simply returned to her post, her silence once again doing more than any roar ever could. Back in Greenfield, a new sign was placed outside City Hall. It read, "This office belongs to the people." And beneath it, smaller words in bronze, "In honor of those who refused to be silent." The reckoning had begun, and it wasn't finished yet. With the indictment of Councilman Bennett underway, the momentum shifted toward lasting change. In Washington, the Equitable Enforcement Act gained bipartisan traction. Designed to federally regulate the use of checkpoint programs and prohibit targeting based on zip codes, race, or socioeconomic status, the bill passed committee review within weeks. General Taylor, requested by name, returned to Capitol Hill in uniform to stand beside lawmakers as the legislation moved forward. Meanwhile, in Greenfield, morale within the police department shifted. Officers once silent began to speak. Anonymous statements and testimonies flowed into federal channels, revealing a deeper rot, one that extended beyond checkpoint abuse to include retaliatory arrests, fabricated reports, and suppressed body cam footage. Detective Morales, now hailed as a catalyst for change, accepted a formal offer to join the FBI's Civil Rights Division. He requested one condition: that his first assignment include overseeing reforms in his hometown. General Taylor watched it all unfold from a quiet distance. She had never asked for headlines, only for justice. And now, with federal hands cleaning local wounds, she finally allowed herself a moment of peace. The mission had never been about revenge. It was about revelation. And that revelation had arrived, shaking a nation awake. The Westfield Town Hall hadn't seen this kind of turnout in years. The room was full, standing room only. Rows of folding chairs lined up like soldiers, every one of them occupied. Some folks were still in their Sunday best, even though it was Tuesday. Others wore hoodies, work boots, old denim jackets. But they were all here for the same reason. A reckoning had come, and now it was time to rebuild. At the front of the chamber, the city seal hung just above the long oak dais, where the mayor stood beside a short stack of prepared statements. But he wasn't the one people had come to see. They were waiting for a face they hadn't yet met, a sign that things had truly changed. Councilman Bennett's chair sat empty, a silent reminder. A local reporter whispered into her mic near the back, "Today marks the formal appointment of a new police chief, one who arrives not from within the system, but from outside it." When the mayor tapped the microphone, the room quieted. "I know trust has been broken," he began. "So today, we are beginning a new chapter. This city owes its citizens protection, dignity, and accountability." Then came the introduction. "With that in mind, I'd like to welcome our new chief of police, Tanya Morales." Applause broke out slowly at first, then rolled through the room like a wave. Some people stood, others wiped tears. Tanya Morales stepped up to the podium, dressed not in a decorated uniform but in a simple navy blazer. Her voice was steady, but her eyes searched the crowd with care. "I didn't come here to fix this overnight," she said plainly. "I came here to listen, to serve, and to make sure that no one in this town is afraid to drive home ever again." In the back row, Taylor sat quietly, almost unnoticed. No stars on her shoulders, no uniform, just a simple charcoal coat and the quiet weight of everything she'd carried. She didn't need to speak, not yet. She was there to watch what came next. After the swearing in, the mayor returned to the mic. "Today, we're also announcing the formation of a permanent community oversight board, composed of Westfield residents, faith leaders, and civil rights experts. This board will review arrest data, patrol decisions, and citizen complaints on a monthly basis." The crowd murmured in approval. One man clapped hard and didn't stop. "And beginning next week," the mayor continued, "all police stop data will be made publicly available online. Every zip code, every reason for the stop, every officer's badge number." That hit harder than any speech could. People didn't just want promises, they wanted transparency. And now, finally, they were getting it. Tanya Morales nodded in support. "Accountability starts with exposure," she said, "but it lives in the light." In the crowd, someone whispered, "About time." Taylor's eyes stayed fixed on the dais. She wasn't thinking about herself. She was thinking about every story she'd heard, every family broken by a checkpoint that never should have been there. Today wasn't about celebration, it was about foundation. And this was the first stone. After the ceremony, the crowd spilled into the lobby of the town hall like warm water flooding through cracks in cold concrete. There was laughter now, uneasy but genuine. Neighbors who had avoided eye contact for years were shaking hands, nodding, even hugging. The air smelled like hope, fragile, unfamiliar, but real. Taylor remained near the edge of the room, standing beside a wall covered in local historical photos, sepia-toned images of Westfield when the streets were dirt and the town square hosted bake sales instead of protests. She was approached by a woman in her 70s, her cane tapping lightly against the polished floor. "You're her," the woman said softly. "The one they arrested." Taylor smiled, just barely. "Yes, ma'am." The woman reached into her worn purse and pulled out a photo. A young black man in a cap and gown. "My grandson. He got caught up in that mess last year. Took his mama 3 months and a lawyer we couldn't afford to get him out. He lost his scholarship. Thought about giving up. But last night he said he wants to go back. Said he saw your testimony." Taylor's throat tightened. She took the photo gently. "He still can." Tears welled up in the woman's eyes. "You brought my grandson back from a record." Those words landed harder than any medal Taylor had ever received. She nodded in gratitude, unable to speak for a moment. Morales stood a few feet away, watching the exchange with a quiet sense of reverence. He had changed, too, not just in title, but in posture, in spirit. Gone was the detached detective with his doubts buried behind procedure. In his place stood a bridge, someone willing to span 2 worlds and invite others across. "Chief Morales," someone called from the other side of the room. He turned but raised a finger. "Wait." He approached Taylor, his voice low. "I wanted you to know. I asked for this, the community liaison role, not just a badge and a title. I asked to be the one to stand between what was and what's coming. Taylor tilted her head. Why? Morales looked toward the doors where sunlight streamed through the glass, illuminating the faces of black families, Latina mothers, white working-class elders, all waiting in line to speak, to be heard. Because I spent too long pretending not to hear them, he said, and you made sure the country couldn't ignore them anymore. Taylor placed a hand on his shoulder. Then lead them forward, not for me, for them. Outside, the crowd grew larger as more residents from Westfield and the surrounding neighborhoods arrived. It was the first town meeting in years where people weren't protesting, they were participating. A young man waved at Morales. You really joining the block party next month? Morales grinned. I'll bring the ribs. The joke landed. For the first time in a long time, it didn't feel forced. Then Taylor stepped up to a small makeshift podium outside, unofficial, unplanned. Microphones clicked on, phones went live. She didn't speak long. I let them arrest me, she said, because most people don't have stars to protect them. A hush swept through the crowd. I didn't come here to prove I was above the law. I came to show that no one is beneath justice. Her voice didn't waver. I am not here to be thanked. I am here to stand beside you as a citizen, as a witness, and as someone who believes that the truth, when exposed, is more powerful than any badge. Applause followed, not loud, but respectful, solid, earned. The sun was just beginning to set as the final act of the day unfolded. A group of workers, city employees, flanked by members of the new Community Oversight Board, walked toward the edge of town. They stopped in front of the steel sign that had stood for nearly 2 years, towering over the entrance to Westfield like a warning. Checkpoint ahead, stay in vehicle, compliance mandatory. It had become a symbol of fear, of control, of everything this town had survived. A small crowd gathered, families holding hands, children on shoulders, journalists quietly filming. Taylor stood near the back, in uniform but without fanfare. She didn't need to be in front this time. The bolt cutters hissed through the cold metal frame, sparks flew, and then the final screw was loosened. The sign dropped with a hollow clang that echoed across the street, and then silence. One of the children began to clap, then others joined. Not wild applause, just something honest, something human. A grandmother stepped forward with her granddaughter, hand in hand. They walked across the place where the checkpoint used to be, their pace unhurried, their dignity fully intact. Taylor closed her eyes for a moment. That sound, the clang of the metal, the quiet footfalls, the laughter of children echoing off brick buildings. It was the sound of a town reclaiming itself, of trust beginning again. The Pentagon briefing room was silent as the lights dimmed and the first slide illuminated the massive screen. At the front, wearing her dress uniform with 4 silver stars glinting under the fluorescent lights, General Victoria Taylor stood tall, composed and unflinching. Her presence alone brought the room to attention. Behind her was a digital map of the United States, marked with glowing red dots, each one representing a city flagged for checkpoint abuse, data manipulation, or unlawful detentions. Today, she began, her voice firm but even, we implement the first wave of oversight protocols nationwide. Rows of officers, civilian advisors, and legal analysts listened closely. She outlined the newly mandated procedures, immediate recording and review of all checkpoint data, random audits overseen by federal monitors, and a hotline that connected civilians directly to military civil rights liaisons. Each police department would be required to submit quarterly transparency reports. Failure to comply would result in federal funding cuts and a possible DOJ probe. One of the slides showed the model used in Greenfield. It had become a blueprint. The case there had turned into a landmark federal example, and Taylor's calm leadership had become synonymous with a new standard for lawful enforcement. Colonel Jackson, seated in the front row, leaned forward with pride. "We're with you, ma'am." Taylor nodded but didn't smile. "This isn't about me," she said. "This is about trust. The people don't owe us trust. We have to earn it every day." She clicked forward. The next slide showed side-by-side footage. One of a Bodycam recording where a young black driver was wrongfully arrested, and another showing a quiet reversal, a community forum where that same young man, recently cleared, shook hands with a new police chief under community oversight. A wave of quiet murmurs filled the room. They were beginning to grasp the scale. Taylor turned from the podium and motioned to a civilian official standing near the back. "Director Callahan from the DOJ will oversee the implementation branch. His team will partner with us and the Civil Rights Division for direct accountability." Callahan stepped forward, eyes serious. "We're opening investigations in multiple jurisdictions starting Monday, but the message is already spreading. Departments across the country are asking to opt in. They've seen what happened in Greenfield. They know it's coming." Taylor nodded again. "Then we begin today." At her signal, officers fanned out. Briefing packets were handed to every department head in the room. Inside were timelines, training modules, audit templates, and language for formal policy restructuring. There was no applause. There didn't need to be. The moment was too heavy for that, too sacred. This wasn't a victory lap, it was a beginning, and Taylor, more than anyone in that room, knew what it had cost to get here. She looked down at the last slide in her presentation, a single sentence centered in bold. "Justice isn't an act, it's a process." The next morning, 17 police departments spanning from Baltimore to Bakersfield submitted formal letters to the Department of Justice. Each letter was short, direct, and carried the same sentiment. "We recognize the need for reform. We request immediate integration into the oversight program." Some were responding to community pressure, others feared federal investigation, but a few, perhaps for the first time, genuinely wanted change. News broke fast. Networks picked up the story before noon. Anchors recounted how the Greenfield scandal, once dismissed as local overreach, had sparked something much bigger. Footage of General Taylor's calm defiance during her unlawful detention played side by side with clips of her testifying before Congress, issuing commands at the Pentagon, and overseeing the deconstruction of checkpoint barriers in neighborhoods across the South. It was no longer just a scandal, it was a movement. By midweek, the Department of Justice had launched investigations into 9 additional cities. These weren't random. They were sites of long-suspected abuse, places where data showed suspicious stop-and-search rates, deeply racially skewed citations, and mysteriously missing body cam footage. In some places, whistleblowers had already stepped forward, inspired by what Morales had done in Greenfield. One of those investigations was in a quiet Midwestern town where an anonymous complaint had alleged that the local police had quotas for arrests based on skin tone. Another was in a sprawling southern suburb where body cams mysteriously stopped working every time a compliance check was scheduled near low-income housing. Taylor was copied on every internal report. She read each one personally. At her office, a new command board was mounted on the wall. Each city under reform or investigation was represented by a colored pin. Red meant under review. Yellow meant audit initiated. Green meant reformed. Oversight board in place, body cam compliance above 90%, and civilian complaints down by at least half. She stared at the pins one morning in silence. 17 green, 9 red, dozens still untouched. "Still too many," she murmured. Her aide, Captain Rivers, stepped in. "We're scheduling travel for your testimony at the upcoming National Police Accountability Conference in Denver." "Cancel it," Taylor said without turning. Rivers paused. "Ma'am, send Morales instead. He's earned that platform. I need to stay here. We're not done." Rivers hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, General." Outside the building, activists had started gathering, holding signs that read, "Accountability is patriotism," and No more checkpoints, no more excuses. Taylor watched from her office window. She didn't go out, she didn't wave. Instead, she turned back to her desk and picked up a file from a new folder labeled Early Warnings. It was a program she'd initiated just days prior, using AI to scan national data for racial disparities in checkpoint stops, arrest rates, and conviction patterns. The goal was to act before the abuses became headlines, before another greenfield. One file caught her eye. A small city in the Pacific Northwest. She flagged it. Then she picked up the phone and called Callahan. "Start there," she said, quietly. Callahan didn't ask why. He already knew. Taylor hung up and leaned back, exhaling slowly. Her uniform, her rank, her entire presence, none of it existed to intimidate. It existed to protect, to warn, to hold the line for those who never got to speak in briefing rooms or testify before Congress. Those who were pulled over, silenced, cuffed, ignored. She looked again at the wall. 17 green. Still too many red. Still too much silence. But not forever. Not anymore. Late that evening, the quiet hum of fluorescent lights filled the Pentagon's operations center. Most desks were empty, but General Victoria Taylor remained at her post, alone in the dimly lit space. A large touchscreen map stretched across the wall, the digital terrain of the United States pulsing softly. Every reform site, every city under investigation, every place still untouched, marked in glowing color. She raised her hand and tapped the screen. A cluster of green dots appeared along the East Coast. She tapped again. More green flickered to life in the Midwest. Red zone still blinked steadily, troubled, watchful, unresolved. But what made her pause were the yellow dots. Potential, but not yet corrupt beyond repair. Not yet complicit through silence. Cities still willing to change before another family was broken, another person humiliated, another child left afraid of sirens. Taylor didn't smile. She didn't cry. She just stood still, eyes focused, hands behind her back. Behind her, soft footsteps echoed. It was Lieutenant Kayla Monroe, the young Air Force officer she'd spoken with days earlier. "I saw you on the news again," Monroe said gently. Taylor nodded once. "And?" Monroe stepped beside her, looking at the map. "It's working." Taylor glanced at her. "It's starting." They stood together in silence. 2 generations. 2 uniforms. 2 stories that almost didn't matter if they hadn't insisted that they did. Monroe finally broke the stillness. "Do you think it'll last?" Taylor's answer was calm. "It will, if we never stop watching." She tapped the screen again. No checkpoints. No silence. No more fear. Just justice under law. And in that moment, the map pulsed once more. But this time, it looked like a heartbeat.